20s. Dear viewers, here are some very new definition to success from 20 brilliant Indians from across the world on Education News Network presented by Education Today, along with me, Dr. Nirmala Krishnan. How would it be if you go around and you get to see there is an architectural building or there is something related to designing kept on a table and you are mesmerized by the design, and after that you also get to know that you get to taste and eat that. Isn't that something different and great? Yes, we have got a fantastic young gentleman who's going to share his journey of being an architect and a food designer. A very unique combination, and this can be a path breaker for many of you watching this show today. So, along with me, come and let's see what Jashan Sippy has got to share about his journey on the 20s. Welcome, Jashan.
Hi, thank you for having me.
I should be saying thank you to you because this is something very, very unique and all of us would like to know more about it. So just want to share with you the flow of this particular program. We're going to have questions through which we will get to know more about Jashan and his journey. The second part is where we get to ask questions from children across India. The third part is when the role is reversed and Jashan gets to ask a question to me. And the final and the most exciting part is when there is rapid fire and Jashan has to answer them very, very quickly. So are we ready to go?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Good luck to you. So Jashan, to know about your journey, we would like to understand, this sounds really, really crazy, okay? Architecture and food design. So what is this all about?
I know it sounds crazy and it sounds crazy, I think, to everyone except to me.
Yes.
Because to me, I think it was the most obvious connection. So I think we have three basic needs: nutrition, shelter, and clothing. And food and architecture, or gastronomy and architecture, are sort of artistic evolutions of two very basic disciplines. So that connection to me was something that is very, I think, natural and something that's very primal in its infant stages. So we perceive, I think, both food and architecture with all our body senses. So I think architecture is not just about vision, but we tend to, as designers, just design for aesthetics very often. And food is not just about taste, because the way we actually perceive food is multi-sensory. So I think this multi-sensory approach is what got me to start looking at connecting food and architecture as disciplines of design. And that to me is how they are connected.
Beautiful. So that is about the basic needs that we have, and you have connected the dots in that. Lovely. Great. So please share your experience, because we read about your dissertation and you had mentioned in that your dissertation was titled Gastronomy and Architecture, Multi-Sensory Experiences, exactly what you explained just now. So what was this dissertation about, and what is the kind of recognition you received because of your thought process, which is very, very unique and different?
So part of the architecture, the Bachelor of Architecture program, in the semi-final semester, so in your 9th semester, which is in your 5th year, you have to write a dissertation, which is, you have 6 months almost of research, and it ends up in a book.
Mm-hmm.
So my exploration was primarily just exploring how we could connect both food and architecture. And I explored it over 12 different chapters. And instead of just conducting, let's say, secondary research, which was reading, publications or watching videos or films or movies and then sort of critiquing it, I took a really hands-on approach. So I was one of the few people from my batch who I would host almost every few weeks food experiences or food events for the college. So I'd have different sort of friends or professors just coming in, and we would explore different things based on what the experiment was about. Um, so one of them, for example, was we would be trying to explore what the role of, let's say, vision is for food. And I was inspired by MasterChef Australia. So we blindfolded we blindfolded everyone who participated, and I gave them sort of cubes of food, which was food that people are used to eating every day.
Okay.
But because we're blindfolded, we sort of don't realize how much we rely on vision, for example, in the way we're perceiving food. So even something like a carrot, because it was cut up in a cube, you couldn't tell the shape of the carrot. You couldn't really smell anything because it was a fresh vegetable which didn't have a distinct aroma. But the minute you bit into it, the carrot has a very, very distinct crunch. And that crunch, for example, for a carrot was what was characteristic of the sensorial experience. So we hosted multiple experiences like this to sort of explore how food is, or food culture and design culture can be sort of crossed with each other. So there were about 12 chapters in the entire book, and I explored even out there and crazy things like building with food. So using Himalayan salt blocks, I experimented and made my own mycelium brick, which is a mushroom brick, which actually has properties because the roots of the mushroom actually are great insulating materials when you apply them to architecture. And so those kind of crosses between connecting, I think, the fantasy of Hansel and Gretel and the gingerbread house into real, I think, or tangible applications was something that I really tried to explore. I will say, though, that if it wasn't for my principal, who was my guide through the project, I don't know if I would have been able to go through with it, because I got a lot of flack from, I think, the professors in general or the system in general, because I think it's not something that you can go and explore in the current curriculum. I even did a chapter on eroticism, food, and architecture.
Wow.
So actually talking about, materials and sensuality and all of those things was also one of the chapters. And I don't think that our education system sort of allows this kind of artistic exploration.
Yes.
But I was encouraged, and we sort of just, I think, did it.
Wow. So all that we read as a child, that is the gingerbread, the Hansel and Gretel, all that is coming true. So today we have these artificial material being used for doll houses. So very soon we may have something which the children can use as doll house, and end of their play they eat it up and they enjoy it. Right? Who knows? Anything can come up, and they have their lunch out of it. Great, great idea, Jashan. So going forward, I also understand and want to share with the viewers that Jashan is a proponent of sustainability in food. So you strongly believe in sustainability and minimal waste. How was your experience creating life-sized installations such as the signature al dente walls made out of pasta past its sell-by date? That is, the pasta which has expired, which cannot be used for cooking, was used for this particular project. So we'd like to hear from you, Jashan, on this.
So I think that kind of approach towards using food when it comes to architecture is unusual, but I think it came from the way I presented the final model. So after the dissertation in architecture school, you actually have to create or translate the research into a architectural design project.
Okay.
So in that particular project, the way I presented it was an edible architectural walkthrough. So instead of having a meter wide model made out of wood or cardboard like you normally do, I made it completely out of different flavors of cake and edible ingredients. The reason I think sustainability started getting engraved in my mind was at the end of that presentation, the entire model was eaten. So I had nothing that was sort of wasted. I had nothing that I had to come back and then store in my room or something like that, which a lot of us, when we graduate, have no space because you have architectural models just filled in your whole room. And they have no use for you after that presentation. But I thought that the fact that my model could have been consumed and there was no waste per se really started imbibing this sort of sensibility in me. So when I moved back to India after doing my master's abroad, I got a client who was a chef whose I was designing her kitchen studio. This was earlier in 2019. And her style of cooking was eclectic European, and I wanted the space to really, I think, represent that style of cooking. I had just finished working at a place called Candytopia, which I'll tell you about in a little while. But there they made sculptures, like life-size sculptures out of candy. So I think I learned the techniques of how to apply food into these sort of architectural or life-size installations. And for that, because her style of cooking was really inspired by her travels across Europe, and she had studied in the Cordon Bleu in London, um, I gave her this al dente wall, which was basically made out of macaroni past its expiration date. So what happens is there's a lot of, so if you have pasta at home and it goes past its expiration date, there's nothing wrong with it. It's not yet really waste because you can still boil it and eat it and nothing happens, in terms of when you're consuming it. But when it comes to a shop, what happens is they have a responsibility of they cannot sell it to you after it passes its sell by date.
Yes.
So what we did was really researched and looked for a lot of these small corner shops, almost the banya or kirana shops.
Okay.
And found a few in Kurla, which was close to a hospitality school that I was working with, which had a lot of this macaroni that was past its expiration date and that he couldn't do anything with. So we managed to procure that and then create this sort of art installation, which was a complete wall with backlighting, so it really enhanced the pasta.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a massive wall that covered the full length of the dining table in her space. And I think what that sort of did was not only became, I think, identity for her space, but also when people started coming into the space, normally if you had plaster or paint on your wall, you don't go and interact with architecture.
Yes.
Because of this texture and the edible nature of it, I think people really sort of came up to always touching it, sometimes smelling it. Even the really exploratory people would go and lick or bite it, which we encouraged them not to do. But that was sort of a playful take on the al dente wall. But of course, at the same time, promoting sustainability, upcycling something that could not be, used again, and promoting the circular economy.
Circular economy. Absolutely. I was just coming to that. That is the future. The circular economy is the future. And for all the viewers, Tamanna Wadhwani, who's based out of Melbourne, Australia, is going to share more about circular economy. And that is the reason she is getting featured in the 20s. And Jashan, great that you have brought out this particular point out here. And for all those people, if they want to see your work, all that you're explaining, where they can go and browse about your work and you.
So we're very active on Instagram, but if you actually want to read more about all of the projects, you can visit our website, www.sugarandspace.in, and you'll get all the projects there.
Yeah, it is sugar, SUGAR, and in the symbol, and space, SPACE, space. So that's very interesting. Sugar and space, that is food and architecture. Right? Okay, great. Going ahead, there are some very interesting things that Jashan has done, and this is the right time to know about it. After your internship in Mumbai, you moved to San Francisco and got engaged in various well-known brands, including Hilton, Marriott, and Holiday Inn. What was your learning through these architectural projects?
So, despite, I think, my passion for food and architecture, it was very hard to find work experience, especially coming from India, with a food design agency. And I think I did a lot of research and reached out to a lot of firms, but they were all sort of based in very remote countries in the EU, and sort of getting work permits covering all of those things was very impractical. Language was also a sort of barrier, with like trying to go to a firm in Lithuania, having studied English, speaking Hindi, understanding a little bit of French. It's very hard to go to Lithuania for your internship when you're, fresh out of college and be like,
Yeah.
okay, now let's start a new adventure. So I applied to a firm in San Francisco, and it was an architecture firm. And they're an Indian firm who focus on architecture but hospitality projects mainly.
Okay.
And that is how I sort of started working on projects which were related to these larger brands in general. I think after I worked with the firm for over 2.5, 3 years over time in San Francisco. And what I think I learned with working with these bigger brands is I think it's not so much. I think when we come from design school, we have a very idealistic approach to design or making our visions come to life. But in the real world, when you're actually practicing, even though you might be designing, I don't know, a 5-star hotel, if it is coming under a brand has certain brand standards.
Yes.
A city has certain regulations which you have to comply with. California, in particular, had very high levels of building codes when it came to meeting accessibility standards for differently abled people. So by the time I think you cover all of these layers, there's very little or no real scope for your vision. Your vision is something that has to keep moving and accommodating, I think, different factors that keep coming in. And that is, I think, something that I definitely learned to change my expectations of, oh, I want to design the fanciest Atlantis hotel. Hey, look, this is what a client's need is. There's a budget, there's a city, there are these requirements you have to meet. And then can you sort of also add your own personality and value into it?
That's a huge challenge, right, Jashan?
It's a massive challenge, and I think all of us struggle with it. Yes. And the good thing about the architecture education, the way it's structured, at least as long as I was in it, was you had a mandatory internship in your 4th year, in the 8th semester.
Okay.
And I think before you do your thesis project, you sort of get a little reality check from your expectations of, oh, I'm in a creative field. I am in a creative field, but I have a lot of responsibility along with it.
Well said, well said. That is a huge statement he has made. Let's go to the next question. You did your MSc in International Business from the HULT International Business School, specializing in entrepreneurships, and opted to also explore being an associate professor, a very different dimension to Jashan's story that you've been hearing till now. So how did that happen, becoming an associate professor?
So I think growing up, I idolized my teachers always. So I always thought my teachers were and I still continue to think my teachers were the best thing that could happen to me. So I always aspired to be like them. So much so that I would love to correct my own notebooks after the year was over and things like that. But I think the reason I pursued, so after doing a creative field like architecture, which is creative and technical, and battling with, oh, should I be a chef or an architect? So I could have just gone and done a course in culinary and been quite happy doing that. What I really realized after working for a few years was I came from a pure science background. So after school, I went to Jashan College. I did, my science there. I was very good academically with the science, but I think except for 2 years in the 9th and 10th grade of doing commercial applications, I had zero knowledge of economics, business, manage, you name it. I had no clue about it. And what I really realized that was, even if I wanted to just run my own architecture firm, no matter how good a designer you might be or how sort of competent with the software you might be, to run your projects, if you can't sort of, I think, run it as a successful business or have an understanding of how to work with a client, how to deliver a brand, how to work with, those kind of project management frameworks, it was something that I really thought I lacked. And therefore, the HULT MSc in International Business was ideal. I think the biggest takeaway for me with working in or studying at an international school like that was I had classmates and colleagues from 60 different countries and
Wow.
nationalities. Which also means now that irrespective of where I want to do business in the world or where you land sort of in the world, you always have someone who's a very dear friend.
Yes.
And that is something that is really, really nice. I
Mhm.
dabbled with the um, idea of, I think, being an associate professor
Mhm.
because I think the best way to learn is to teach.
Yes.
And in the last two sort of semesters of we didn't call them semesters, we call them modules because it was a very accelerated program.
Mhm.
In the last two sort of modules, I had the opportunity to work with the newer incoming batches.
Okay.
And then the year going forward, the year after I graduated, while I was there, I would also go and be a teaching associate with some of the professors that I had learned from.
Okay.
So it was sort of that's how it came about.
Wow. So from an architect to a food designer to an associate professor, I'm bringing a fourth dimension to Jashan Sippy. Yes, the fourth dimension is an entrepreneur. Yes, let's see what he has to say about his entrepreneurial journey. An interesting thing I read about you was use food waste to 3D print food. How did that become the concept of sugar and space? Our viewers would like to know more about your entrepreneurial journey.
So I think anyone who knew me in my first, let's say, 24 years would have never estimated that, okay, I would start my own company.
Okay.
I have always been sort of creative, very optimistic, exploratory in that sense. But I think that 1 year of doing that master's in international business and specializing in entrepreneurship, and I think living fully by yourself
Hmm.
really spurs sort of growth and responsibility in you.
Okay.
And it's not essential that I think you go abroad to do it. I think as long as whatever is sort of available to you within your means, if you're able to, even I think if I move from Bombay to Bangalore for an internship, that growth is massive. I think that is something that's extremely important. And because I was lucky enough to be working in San Francisco, working there. I also had the chance to travel a little bit. And one of the trips that I took last year was to the Netherlands because I was meeting with the world's biggest eating designer, Mariah Vogelsang, who's based out of there.
Okay.
And I sort of am affiliated with her Dutch Institute of Food and Design.
Mm-hmm.
So I had gone there to meet her, and I was flying EasyJet, which is a very economical magazine from London to Rotterdam. And I opened the magazine, and the whole magazine happened to be about food and design. Now, what are the chances that that month's theme was food and design? I would be on that airplane that month. I just thought it was like, okay, something in the universe is working.
Yes.
And what Alt really taught us to do was to always have a growth mindset. So part of this whole entrepreneurial attitude is to, not be afraid of failure, but just give something a fair shot and see, how far you can take it. Of course, at the same time being rational, because just going blindly doing just something you want to do is very different from saying that it's something that the world wants and needs. So the food printer was actually the company that manufactures them was featured in that magazine. And I just wrote an email to them saying, look, I'm in Rotterdam, you're in Eindhoven, which is a little city south of Rotterdam in the Netherlands, or east, sorry. And I heard back from them the next day, and we scheduled a meeting. So I went and met them. They did a demonstration of this printer for me. And they printed my Sugar and Space logo with cream cheese live. And then they said, okay, now you can eat it. I think that's to me, that just sold it. So what I did immediately before being impulsive and saying, oh my God, I must have this sort of printer, which is, by the way, the size of a briefcase. So
Okay.
it's mobile and you can sort of put it into hand carry and fly with it wherever you go. So it's almost makes you like a mobile factory.
Interesting.
Um, the real key was I called. I work with a few hospitality schools in Bombay. I teach here now. I called the schools and I said, "Is this something that you guys would be interested in? I know it's not something that's available at all in India. I'm thinking of buying it, but I would love to sort of be able to share this knowledge with the upcoming and new students and batches of hospitality because that's where the future of hospitality could be."
Yes.
And I got really positive response. So it took a while, but then finally decided to acquire the printer, purchased it, and I think we like to use food waste because again, it's something that, think about it. At home, we have, let's say, carrot juice. You drink the juice and you're left with that husk.
Yeah.
Now, in a city like Bangalore, I know a lot more of my friends who are into composting, for example.
Yes.
In Bombay, unfortunately, we don't even have that kind of space and infrastructure. So it just gets thrown away. So my first experiment actually with the food waste was after having carrot juice, we were left with the pulp.
Okay.
I sort of processed it, seasoned it, made it into a sort of puree that was then printable. So it was an edible ink.
Wow.
And then I put in the design into the printer. And one of the first experiments was sort of with, transforming food waste into 3D printed food. And after that, I think it's really exploded and picked up.
Lovely. Just for our viewers to understand, tentatively, what would be the price range of such a printer?
So unfortunately, like anything you're importing
Yes.
to India, the true cost versus the landing price when you officially import something is very high, very different. But I would say with insurance, shipping, duties, etc., it was about 7 lakhs. So it is not something that I think everyone can have in their kitchens yet.
Yes.
Once I think it's more widespread in the market and easier to use, it is something that maybe we could see in our kitchens of the future.
Why not? Why not? We will have a lot of people now starting to think about this as a business opportunity. So thank you, Jashan. We will move to the second round where we have questions from students. Can I go ahead with those?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So this student who wants to know, when did you come to realize your passion for food industry?
Interesting that's an interesting one because I've always loved baking in particular.
Okay.
I grew up with my nanny baking cakes, and that was something that I loved doing.
Huh. Okay. Good.
I went for an internship to a well-known pastry kitchen. I won't name it, of a very big brand in Bombay, and I lasted a embarrassingly short amount of time in that kitchen.
Okay. Bye.
So I think more than passion for the food industry, I think I have always been fascinated with feeding the people that I love, or really seeing the reactions on people's faces when you sort of feed them. So I've worked with different materials as an architect, from steel to glass to wood to plaster. But I like to use food as a material because it's the most intimate way to connect with someone, because it goes into the body.
Connect so well.
And I think because of my always having a passion for food, and then just the fact that the architecture education broadened my horizon, I think that's how I sort of just connected them. But I knew I would always do something with food. It was something just followed my heart.
Yes, following your heart. The next question comes from this kid who is asking, what is the scope of food designing?
So right now, the industry as food design is still very nascent. It was sort of started in the 1980s by this one gentleman called Martí Guixé, who's in Spain, based out of Barcelona. And food designers do, I think, a range of work. So anywhere, and this is my own definition of food design because there's not a definition really that exists officially. Food designers, in my opinion, work anywhere along the supply chain.
Okay.
So you could apply design thinking to any part of it, which could include, let's say, right from the farm, so from growing and production to storage, processing, transportation, retail, um, the sale, as well as consumption, and finally, even dealing with food waste. So, if you apply any of those um, thoughts to it, that you could be a food designer. I think it's more the values and the approach you take versus the work that you do that could make you a food designer.
So there's a wide scope to this particular profession.
Yeah, and you're not a chef necessarily.
Yes.
You don't have to be creating food. So I think because of the words food and design, a lot of people, including my own mother, thinks that food design is the way you make food look or the way you plate, and that is food styling or food art or plating, or they're different things, and it's not necessarily food design. It's more umbrella.
Get your point. The next question is, how do I convince my parents who want me to be an engineer and help me pursue my passion?
A very similar story, because when I said, "Oh, I want to be a chef," unfortunately, in our country, it's not a profession that's widely, I think, still looked upon as something like, "Oh, mera beta ya beti doctor ya engineer ban gayi or ban gaya," And I also struggled with that a little bit because my parents really wanted me to pursue a more solid career with, being an architect and having that under my belt. I really think that our parents, of course, they mean well, and have the best intentions when they sort of encourage us to do these things. But I think the world also today is very different. So you could do or study anything and you could work as anything else. I think it's about really learning to apply your mind or skill set and being able to have those transferable skills. And I think especially for anyone who's working, especially after this year with COVID, for example, a lot of industries will also again completely transform and change. Does that mean that because you studied engineering, you're not going to do new job opportunities that come up? No. I think so. That's just something we need to, irrespective of what you study, as long as you take value from it, you can apply it any way you like.
Beautifully answered, Jashan. Thank you so much. So we come to the reverse part of this particular discussion where you get to ask me a question.
So exciting. Okay. So I know that you've been interacting with a lot of millennial 20-year-olds through this sort of series that you're working on. What is, let's say, one trait or one characteristic in general of the millennial 20-year-olds that maybe you have identified or come across? And what is the one tip that you would give these millennial 20-year-olds after you've interacted with us through this series?
Will you give me an option of spreading it a little wide beyond the 20 of you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay, thank you so much for that. Okay, great. So yes, interacting with the 20s, that is the age group 20 to 29 through this project has been a huge level of learning, because what I observed was you all live in a very different world than where I grew up, right? So when I see that, the understanding or the interactions you all have with your environment, the sensibilities, the awareness, the knowledge, all that is many times further, though being a very progressive person in my own career and field, I am well read and know a lot more. But when I still see that you people are many levels ahead of all of us, and we have got so many parents who are not so well read and not so well traveled, I feel you have a cutting edge on knowledge. You have a cutting edge on your communication skills because of that, and the kind of connectivity you have across the world is definitely going to be a path breaker for all of you. And many of the 20s have been very, very humble, down to earth, in spite of their achievements. So that is something which is very, very nice to see. And one thing that I can share with all of you is that they, it may happen, and it is observed in many cases, that sometimes few people in their 20s, after achieving, you all are still in your journey, you have so much more to achieve. Please do not allow this to hamper your further growth, because it gets into your head. Sorry to say, but this is something which I'm getting to observe with people who are moving beyond their 20s and touching their 30s. They get into a feeling that we know it all, and when that comes into you, I think the growth ends. And I've seen a lot of people crash in their 30s because of this particular attitude. So if that little check can be kept by the 20s, they will be amazing achievers in the future.
Thanks for that.
Yeah. So that is my humble observation and feedback to all of you. So can we go to the final round, the rapid fire?
Yeah.
Okay. So there we go for the rapid fire. Great. So Jashan, all set?
Yes.
Okay.
Nervous.
This is a little I picked up from your journey. You mentioned about working in the marijuana plantations. What's that?
So in California, it's completely legal. One of our clients had this massive plot of land.
Okay.
And just like this is through the architecture firm, we worked on a lot of winery projects because the Napa Valley in California, which is very nearby, is known for its wineries. And I think a lot of people in Northern California had also started, I think, trying to create these sort of processing plants and units for marijuana. So it's basically, you imagine a winery where you have, the grapevines growing, and then a processing plant to create the wine, and then a space maybe for tasting and selling, and then of course for distribution. So that was the sort of equivalent that we did for a marijuana plantation.
Thank you for that. The next one is a moment of failure, if any, at Sugar in Space.
Oh, all the time. One of the things that's very close to my heart is a workshop called Storytelling Through Shoe, which is about shoe pastry. So when you cut into shoe pastry, it has these small pockets, which I look at as architecture. I tried to launch this workshop last year, maybe 3 times, with different sort of partners, and got no sign-ups because people didn't understand what it was. During the lockdown, we remarketed it as a creativity workshop online, and we had people sign up from, I think, over 15 countries all over the world, and over about 70 or 80 people attended it. So I think that's how you can also turn failure multiple times into success through perseverance.
And that's why Jashan is on. Jashan is getting featured in the 20s, right? Okay, great. You have been an associate professor at 4 of the 6 international campuses, including San Francisco, Boston, Dubai, and Shanghai. Can you please share one memorable moment from there?
I think so. The one with Boston was interesting because I was studying in New York and I was taking the classes virtually in Boston. I think each campus was sort of different, but the most, I think, key takeaway was the fact that the school was, the Hult International Business School is so sort of international and inclusive, irrespective of which campus you're working with. Students have sort of shuffled and mixed. So I remember thinking that I was working with the Shanghai campus, but I was doing a class with Boston because few of the students had rotated from Shanghai to Boston.
Wow.
So I got confused during my own class about which campus I was working with.
Okay, that's interesting. So that's the kind of learning. That's why I said the advantage that you people have in your 20s today is this kind of a connect across the world. Wow. And the last one is, what will be more exciting for you to leave Sugar in Space?
I haven't found it yet, but if it's there, I'm waiting for it.
Waiting for it. Yeah. So with that note, we would like to wish Jashan the very best because he started off being an architect, yes, and then he moved on to be a food designer, further to be an associate professor and is an entrepreneur today. So the journey further, we wish him the very best and thank you so much for accepting to be a part of the 20s and being on this show. Thank you,
Thank you
Jashan.
so much. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, thank you again. So, dear viewers, we have had this lovely interaction with this young gentleman who was sharing his journey with you all today. We all know there are different things like career, passion, job, work, whatever it is. But when do we find that new definition of success for ourselves will make a lot of difference from there on. Looking forward to launching many of you here for the 20s. Signing off for now, Dr. Nirmala Krishnan on behalf of Education News Network presented by Education Today. Stay home, stay safe.